I was halfway through my shift at the cafe when she walked in. Same time as always, around 6, when the place had just enough noise to keep her from standing out, but not enough to swallow her whole. She wasn't my boss. Not really. She just owned the building where I rented the basement apartment. But the way she carried herself, sleeves rolled, bags slung over her shoulder like she'd been putting out fires all day, it was easier to fall into calling her that. She had that presence. She nodded at me as she stepped up to the counter. Coffee. Black. You already know. I smiled, trying not to look like I was waiting for that line. Medium or large? Her eyebrow lifted, just enough. Medium. I don't trust people who need large. I half laughed, hands moving automatically through the motions. Scoop, tam, pour. But my eyes caught on the way she tapped her fingers against the counter, slow and even, as if she was keeping time with something I couldn't hear. It wasn't attraction in the lightning strike sense. More like noticing. Like realizing a song you thought was background noise has been following you for months. Rough day? I asked, sliding the cup toward her. She didn't answer right away, just wrapped both hands around the cup, like it might steady her. Every day's rough, she said eventually, softer than I expected. But coffee helps. I wanted to ask more, but the bell over the door jingled and someone else came in. She gave me a half smile, almost an apology, and moved to her usual corner table by the window. From behind the counter, I watched her set down her bag, pull out papers she probably wouldn't touch, and stare out into the street instead. Her lips pressed against the rim of the cup, her gaze slipping past everything outside. It was the kind of look you only caught if you were paying too much attention. And I was. I filled the sugar jar even though it was already full. Wiped the counter twice. All excuses to glance back at her without being obvious. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't pull it out. It was probably my roommate again, another unfinished group chat, another weekend plan I'd quietly ghost. Most of my texts ended up unsent drafts anyway. I typed them, read them, then hit backspace until nothing remained. She stayed longer than usual that night. Maybe because it was raining, maybe because she just didn't want to go back home yet. At one point, she caught me looking and gave me that same eyebrow raise from earlier. Not unkind. More like she knew I had nothing better to do. When the clock hit closing, she gathered her things and walked up to the counter again. The cup was empty, her papers still untouched. You lock up soon? She asked. 10 minutes. She nodded, adjusting the strap of her bag. Then she leaned just slightly across the counter, close enough that I noticed the faint smell of rain in her hair. Don't stay out too late, she said, almost teasing, almost not. I fumbled for a reply, but she was already at the door, umbrella clicking open as the rain kept falling. By the time I turned the key in the cafe's lock, my phone buzzed again. A new message. From her. It was short, just 6 words. Tonight you're in charge. L. I stared at the screen, rain dripping off the awning above me, trying to decide if she meant it the way it sounded. And for the first time in months, I didn't hit delete. I didn't answer her text that night. Just stared at it until the screen dimmed. Whatever she meant, I wasn't ready to test it. The next morning, I ran into her on the front steps of the house. She was balancing a grocery bag against her hip, keys dangling from her mouth, when she spotted me. Don't just stand there, she said around the keys, muffled but amused. Grab the door. I did, and she slipped past me with a soft, breathless laugh. The kind of laugh people don't usually waste on landlords. Inside the hallway, she shifted the bag onto the counter, and a tea box spilled out. Chamomile. You drink this? I asked, mostly to fill the silence. Helps me sleep, she said. Then, after a pause, or at least it used to. Her voice had dropped, like she hadn't meant to admit it. We stood there longer than we should have. Just me with my hands in my hoodie pocket, her brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She looked like she was considering saying more, then thought better of it. Thanks for the help, she said finally, tugging the bag closer. I should have gone back downstairs. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Bad dreams?" She glanced at me, sharp at first, then soft. "Not dreams. Just too much quiet." The words hung between us. I thought about my own room, where the hum of my old fridge kept me from noticing how empty the nights were. Maybe we were both trying to drown the same kind of silence. I made a small joke, something about lending her my fridge if she needed company. She smiled at that, though the smile didn't last long. She poured hot water into 2 mugs before I could object, sliding one across the counter toward me. The steam curled between us, faintly floral, faintly bitter. We drank in silence. But it wasn't empty silence anymore. It was weighted, the kind that asked questions without speaking. I noticed the faint mark where her wedding ring used to be, skin a shade lighter than the rest of her hand. I shouldn't have looked. She noticed me noticing, and turned her hand over, palm down on the counter. "Divorced?" The word almost slipped out. I swallowed it. Instead, I said, "Tea's good." She nodded once, eyes lowering to her cup. I thought about all the things people might assume if they saw us like this. Me, 22, her at least twice that. Landlady and tenant. It would sound like a story told wrong, the kind of thing whispered about, not admitted out loud. But in that moment, none of it felt wrong. It felt steady. Like finding a seat on a moving bus, legs braced against the turns. When she got up, she touched my sleeve lightly. Just her fingertips brushing fabric. "Don't work too hard today," she said. A casual line. A neighborly line. But I felt the heat of her hand long after she left the kitchen. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. A week passed without more late-night texts. I told myself I was relieved. That things had settled back into something ordinary. But ordinary didn't last. It was a Thursday evening when I came home early, arms full of groceries. Her car was in the driveway, but the lights in her place were dim. On impulse, I knocked. She opened the door half a crack, hair damp, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands. "You're home early," she said. Yeah? Class got cancelled." My words tangled. "I thought maybe you'd want help carrying something in." A pause. Then she let the door swing wider. "Nothing to carry," she said. "But you can come in if you want." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and rain. A lamp threw soft yellow light against the walls. She moved around, setting magazines in neat piles that didn't need fixing, shifting a throw blanket already folded. I stood there, clutching a bag of apples like an idiot. "You don't have to hover," she said, almost teasing. "I'm not going to collapse." I wasn't. I stopped, realizing how it sounded. She looked at me, waiting for the rest, but I had nothing. Silence stretched. She sighed, sat down on the edge of the couch. "Long day." I set the groceries on her counter, trying to pretend I belonged. "Want some tea?" She gave me a small smile. "You're learning." I boiled water, the sound filling the room while either of us spoke. When I handed her the cup, her fingers brushed mine, just enough to make me aware of every nerve in my arm. She held the mug close, but didn't drink. Instead, she studied me like I was something half familiar, half dangerous. "You shouldn't be up here too much," she said finally. "People might misunderstand." The words stung, though her tone was calm. I looked away, pretending to notice a photo frame on her shelf. A younger version of her, smiling with someone I guessed was her ex-husband. "I don't care what people think," I said too quickly. Her lips parted like she might answer, but a knock at the door broke whatever that was. It was my friend Jason, loud, casual, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey man, you forgot we were gonna..." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes flicking between us. Sorry. Didn't know you were busy." I muttered something about groceries, about tea. My face burned. She didn't correct him. Didn't explain. Just watched quietly as I stumbled toward the door. When Jason left, the silence returned, heavier now. I turned back. She was still on the couch, hand curled loosely around her mug. You should go, she said softly. I nodded but didn't move. My feet stayed rooted. She looked at me, longer this time, steadier. Something flickered there. For a moment, I thought she might reach for me. For a moment, I almost leaned in. But then she set the mug down, breaking the spell. Good night, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. And just like that, the lines stayed unbroken. It was late, a Tuesday, and the cafe had just closed. I was stacking chairs when she appeared outside, umbrella in hand. She didn't wave, just waited until I unlocked the door. You walk home this way? She asked. Yeah. I hesitated, then added, Want company? She didn't answer, just fell in step beside me. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick, lamps reflecting off puddles. We didn't talk much. Just the sound of our shoes, her umbrella tapping against her leg. At the corner, she slowed. I used to walk here with my daughter. When she was little. I glanced at her. She was watching the street like it still belonged to that memory. She doesn't visit much now, she added. A small shrug, like it didn't matter. But the way she gripped the umbrella handle told me it did. I wanted to say something comforting, but my throat locked. Instead, I stuffed my hands in my pockets and muttered, I'm sorry. She gave a quiet laugh, not unkind. Don't be. It's just life. We reached a park bench near the corner store. She sat without asking, and I followed. The night air carried that faint wet dirt smell, the kind that lingers after rain. For a while, we just sat. Her shoulders leaned back, mine tense forward. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. You know this is complicated, right? My pulse stuttered. Yeah. You're too young. And I. She cut herself off, shaking her head. People would talk. I don't care what people say, I said, sharper than I meant. She turned to me then, eyes steady, searching. But you would care. Later. You think you won't, but... Her words trailed, caught somewhere between fear and certainty. I wanted to tell her I thought about her all the time. About the quiet tea nights, the way her sleeve brushed my hand, the text I never knew how to answer. Instead, all I managed was, I don't look at anyone else the same way. The confession hung there. Not dramatic, not even polished. Just raw. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. The silence stretched until I thought it would break me. Finally, she exhaled. You shouldn't say things like that. But her voice wavered. I leaned forward slightly, not enough to close the space, just enough that the air between us shifted. She didn't pull back. Her hand rested on the bench between us, palm down. My fingers twitched, almost reaching, almost. We sat like that, suspended in the almost. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, just for a flicker of a second, before she pulled her hand away and stood. Come on, she said quietly. It's late. I followed, heart hammering, words unsaid buzzing in my chest. And I couldn't help wondering, if I'd touched her hand just then, would she have let me? The week after the walk, everything shifted. I didn't see her at the cafe. No footsteps above my basement room. No clink of her keys in the hallway. It was like she'd folded herself out of my daily rhythm. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Schedules misaligned. But on the fourth night, when her mailbox still overflowed with circulars, I realized she wasn't just busy. She was gone. I caught her one evening finally, unlocking the front door with bags in both hands. I offered to help, but she shook her head before I could even finish the sentence. I've got it, she said. Her voice was clipped. Not unkind, but trimmed of everything soft. Inside, I noticed the suitcase tucked by the stairs. Half-zipped, like it had been left in a hurry. You traveling? I asked. Just a visit. My daughter needed me. She said it quickly, as if rehearsed. I nodded, though my chest tightened. She had never mentioned her daughter beyond that one walk. Never said how old she was, where she lived. The suitcase felt like evidence of a life I wasn't invited to imagine, She brushed past me then, her shoulder grazing mine in a way that wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was. I couldn't tell anymore. 4 days after, her absence spread through the house like dust. I still heard echoes, her kettle whistle in my head, her laugh repeating itself at odd moments, but they weren't real. Just traces. I tried to text her once. Typed, "Hope you got back safe." My thumb hovered over send. Then I deleted it. Another night, I almost knocked on her door. Stood there with my hand raised, heartbeat quick in my throat. But the silence on the other side was so complete it felt like a rejection before I even knocked. At the cafe, I found myself glancing at her usual seat by the window. Empty every time. I started cleaning that table more than the others, wiping the surface longer than necessary, as if waiting for her to appear. Jason asked about her once, casually. "Your landlady. Haven't seen her around. Everything okay?" I shrugged. "She's fine." My voice cracked on the word, and I knew he didn't believe me. But what could I say? That I missed someone I had no right to miss? That I was waiting for a door to open that might never open again? Nights grew longer. My fridge hummed louder. And each time I scrolled through my phone, I found myself back at that blank message box, staring at her name. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. So I set the phone down. Let the screen go dark. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't try to imagine what she was doing. I just sat there, in the unfinished space she left behind. I found her in the kitchen one night, past midnight. The light above the stove was on, everything else dim. She stood barefoot, pouring water into the kettle, hair pulled back like she hadn't planned to be seen. I almost backed away. But the floor creaked under me, and she turned. "You're up late," she said. "So are you." Her smile was faint, tired. She turned back to the kettle, waiting. I stepped in, leaning against the doorway like I belonged there. The silence stretched. Finally I said, "You've been gone. I told you. My daughter needed me." "Yeah. I know." I hesitated. "But you didn't say goodbye." Her shoulders rose, then sank. "Sometimes it's easier not to." I crossed the kitchen slowly, stopping at the counter across from her. The kettle hissed low, a restless sound. "Easier for who?" I asked. She looked up then. Really looked. Her eyes glimmered in the half-light, not sharp this time, just tired, guarded, maybe even guilty. "You're too young," she whispered. "You don't understand what this would mean." "I understand enough," I said, though my voice cracked. "I understand I think about you even when I don't want to. I understand that when you disappear, it feels like someone pulled the ground out from under me." Her hand tightened on the edge of the counter. She didn't speak, so I kept going, afraid I'd lose the courage if I stopped. "I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking you not to pretend it's nothing." The kettle whined, but neither of us moved. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again, steady this time. "You don't know how much I wish it were different." That was the closest to a confession I'd heard from her. It broke something open in me, relief, ache, everything at once. I reached across the counter, slow, uncertain. My hand brushed hers. Not gripping, not demanding. Just there. For a long moment, she didn't pull away. Her thumb shifted slightly, enough to graze my skin. "You make it hard to stay away," she said, voice almost breaking. "Then don't," I whispered. The kettle clicked off behind her, sudden and loud. Neither of us moved to pour the tea. We just stood there, our hands touching on the counter, the whole house holding its breath. Finally, she gave the smallest nod, like she couldn't trust her voice. Then she exhaled and said softly, "Okay." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forever. But it was real. And that was enough. Time didn't fix things all at once. It never does. But weeks later, she started showing up at the cafe again. Always around 8:47 a.m., just like before, like her clock was tuned to that minute. Black coffee, medium. Same seat by the window. Only now, when she caught me looking, she didn't raise her eyebrow in warning. She just smiled. Small, but there. Sometimes she stayed longer. Sometimes she left quickly. But she always said goodbye. At home, routines shifted too. Some nights, we shared tea in the kitchen without talking much. Other nights, we sat outside on the bench near the corner store. No confessions, no plans. Just two people breathing the same air, the silence less heavy than it used to be. She told me a little more about her daughter, about the divorce, about the years that felt wasted. Not all at once, just pieces, scattered across evenings. I never pressed. I just listened. And I found myself sharing things I didn't expect to say out loud. How I avoided calls from friends. How sometimes I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. How the hum of my fridge kept me company when nothing else did. She didn't try to solve it. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, nodding once in a while. That was enough. The guilt, the hesitation, it never vanished completely. But it softened. Like sharp edges worn down over time. We still caught ourselves pulling back sometimes, remembering what people might think. But more and more, we leaned in anyway. One evening, after a long day, she came into the cafe just as I was wiping down the counter. She sat at her usual spot and waited, even though I hadn't brewed her coffee yet. "You forgot something," she said when I finally brought it over. "What's that?" Her smile was faint but steady. "To sit down." So I did. Across from her, the same window light spilling across the table as it always had. For a while neither of us spoke. She tapped her finger lightly against her cup. I folded the napkin in front of me into smaller and smaller squares. And in that ordinary moment, just coffee cooling between us, I realized how different the silence felt now. Not empty. Not dangerous. Just ours. I don't remember what we talked about after that. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I do remember walking back home together, side by side, without needing to explain what it meant. Looking back, I don't think there was a single moment when we became anything. No line crossed, no kiss that sealed it. Just the slow accumulation of days, of pauses, of almost that finally steadied into something real. Something only we understood. And maybe that was the point all along.